Hello, tea sippers! Welcome to an all-new episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. Grab your mugs, there's a lot to get to. Tea sippers, it's so great to have you back. Welcome to an all-new episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. This is your host, Mark Long, and you know I bring it to you fresh every single week. And this week, we're going to get to a lot of different topics, so grab your mugs, make sure they're filled, and make sure you are ready just to hear the tea. We're going to start by talking about the recent election in Wisconsin with the Supreme Court, and what does this actually mean for the dairyland? Take a listen to this.
NBC News projects that the Democratic aligned candidate, Chris Taylor, has been elected to the state Supreme Court. This does represent a flip of a seat on that court. This is a seat held by outgoing Republican-aligned Justice Rebecca Bradley, meaning, in terms of the politics of the court in Wisconsin, this now gives the Democrats, with this victory, a two-seat majority on that Wisconsin Supreme Court. That means, the way these elections are scheduled, their majority is now safe until at least the year 2030. So with this victory, the Democratic side in Wisconsin on the Supreme Court pads its majority, now has a two-seat majority, and given the scheduling of these elections, cannot lose it until at least 2030. So this is and for this call to come in this quickly from our decision desk, this is a pretty definitive result.
All right, tea sippers. So that was Steve Kornacki from NBC News, who typically does his little rundown for election day, but also he does elections all year round. So go and get your coverage wherever you get it from, but I think he's a good resource. So Chris Taylor is a Democratic-backed Wisconsin Court of Appeals judge who defeated the conservative Maria Lazar on April 7th this month. And I'm a little behind into the tea on this, but obviously I voted for Chris Taylor. It's about time in Wisconsin that we have a majority Supreme Court that leans left. And, you know, the voting turnout here was quite significant. So 60% of the vote went to Taylor and about 39% went to Lazar. And we know that these term seats are about 10 years on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and the race was already called by AP and CNN, like pretty shortly after the polls closed. So that lets you know how popular she was of a choice in her state. But most importantly, Taylor's victory increases the court's liberal bloc from 5 to 2, which has strengthened the trend of liberalism here in the state since 2020. Now, the majority is now in effect and locked in until 2030, like Steve Kornacki said. But most importantly, we have to look at a lot of policies that could come into play here. So redistricting, right, is something that a lot of people have talked about, specifically in a lot of red states. But most importantly here in Wisconsin, because we are a purple state and we typically lean right or left, depending on what is important to the voters in the moment. And redistricting, is something that has been a topic of discussion for many years here in the United States. But most importantly here in Wisconsin, we're looking at making sure that a lot of counties have equal representation across the board. Now, we know that a lot of counties leaned to the right to vote for Republican, in other words, to vote for Trump in the most recent election, but there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the financial trends and the cost of living now here in our state, where we're likely to see a shift from red to blue in a lot of these majority diverse populations and counties across the state. Another issue here is abortion rights, right? So that's going to be quite significant, especially seeing how things are being passed along in this current administration and how this is going to impact those here in Wisconsin. We know that Planned Parenthood is still operating here in the state based on a lot of lawsuits that have happened. But most importantly, you know, having a majority blue Supreme Court will allow for some decisions to be leaning in the right direction in regards to giving women the right to choose what to do with their bodies. Obviously, union and labor cases and then also election rules and voting rights are going to come into play. And with Chris Taylor now being on the court, we know that protecting rights and freedom is something that she talked about. She also talked a lot about ensuring that equal justice under the law is something that's carried on throughout in the workplace and also for those of diverse backgrounds. And she also ran a lot on strengthening democracy. So people are hungry for a judiciary that protects our rights, is what she said, to quote her. And then she also said that all Wisconsinites basically should afford, equal justice under the law, but should be able to afford their everyday life. And that's super important for us because I think in Wisconsin we want our leaders or our judiciary off officials to operate based on fact and not based on, whatever their personal ideology is. So this is quite exciting for our state. Okay, so switching gears, I want to talk a little bit more about everything that's been going on this week. Most importantly, with these hailstorms in Wisconsin, there's been a lot of damages across the county, in Dane County, but even in Milwaukee and Waukesha, there's floods happening everywhere, and we're expected to get more storms tonight. Take a listen to this.
Tonight, families evacuating neighborhoods as floodwaters inundate parts of the Midwest. Collapsed roadways swallowing this car today.
I looked outside and there was heavy rain, and then all of a sudden it was up to the doors of cars.
You can hear rain and hail pelting vehicles in Kansas. Powerful winds toppling tree after tree there and tangling power lines. Cameras captured floodwaters in and outside of the Milwaukee Brewers game, stranding baseball fans leaving Wednesday.
I'm about terrified.
Claire Peterson from our NBC affiliate in Green Bay is on the ground in hard-hit Wisconsin.
People are putting sandbags around their businesses as more rain is expected in this area come Friday.
Dams in Michigan have been overwhelmed by unrelenting rain and snowmelt.
These waves are huge, man.
The water level is just inches from topping the Sheboygan Dam, indicating a high probability of a need to evacuate. Authorities in Wisconsin say a man was struck by lightning while walking through the parking lot last night, later dying at the hospital, while a fast-moving storm brought a rare water spout outside of Seattle. And for tens of millions out east today, an early heat wave sending temperatures up to 30 degrees above average, reaching record highs today in Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Norfolk. Baseball fans showing how they're getting by.
A lot of water today. Sunscreen and water.
And those on the right like to talk about that climate change isn't a real thing and global warming doesn't exist. Here's the thing. Obviously, this has been breaking news for the past couple days about the deadly weather that has been slamming the Midwest. But most importantly, here in Wisconsin, it's definitely something that we're starting to see first and foremost and firsthand. These hail storms were ridiculous. Like, it has caused a lot of damage, especially to my neighborhood here in Madison. But most importantly, there's a lot of dented cars I'm seeing with a lot of debris all over our streets and all over our sidewalks and backyards. Most importantly, there's a lot of busted windshields and damages to people's roofs. And the claims are so high right now that there's so much waiting around in regards to insurance companies getting people in to get their cars repaired. But most importantly, people coming out to fix homes here in the city of Madison. A lot of homes here, especially depending on where you live, are older, right? Some of the homes are hundreds of years old. So these storms are causing quite the damage. And I want to also highlight the importance of all of everything that's going on right now, especially in Milwaukee, in the Milwaukee area, and then with the guy that was struck by lightning in Waukesha, like how absolutely insane. So I just want to highlight the safety component here. If you know any family members that are living in the Midwest, just reach out and check on them and make sure they're safe and make sure they're good. We know that tornadoes have been spotted and seen. I believe it was Tuesday night we were hit with at least 5 tornadoes here alone around south central Wisconsin and around southeast Wisconsin. And also there has been a lot of back and forth in regards to the weather. So some nights are very, very chilly. Some nights are very, very warm and windy. And it's just very sporadic here. So everybody take care of yourself. Everybody knows what's going on. I wish there's a lot more funding that went into supporting meteorologists and those who actually study climate and make sure that our citizens here in the country are safe and they're approaching all of the destruction and all the warnings with caution. But most importantly, just be safe and make sure you are going to your locations where you can seek shelter. Because the flood and everything and all the rain and all the storms are not done. And we're probably going to get a little bit more going into the weekend. But hopefully that'll mean that some of the weather will calm down because it's gardening season for me. I love to play in my garden. I love to do things in the backyard. So hopefully there will be some time for me to do that amidst all these hailstorms and all the damages and worrying about repairs and insurance calls and all that. So, all right. So let's switch gears a little bit more. So I want to talk a little bit about some things that are in a pipeline. For example, here in Wisconsin, just to stay in our state, There was a protest that was mentioned in Blue Mound over some dogs that were being improperly kept. Take a listen to this.
Around 60 activists broke into Ridgeland Farm Sunday, a facility in Blue Mounds that breeds beagles for biomedical research.
We did know that this was going to happen ahead of time.
Ridgeland Farm spokesperson Jim Newman says they had additional security over the weekend after getting word about the operation.
Everyone, we're in Wisconsin preparing to make an effort to save the Richland dogs.
That video was posted a few days before the break-in by Wayne Shing, an activist and a main organizer of the operation. He was among those arrested Sunday.
They call this a peaceful protest, as you can see, using sledgehammers and saws and crowbars is not peaceful. That's destructive.
We cut into a fence so we could get through and rescue puppies. Rescuing puppies. How should this be necessary?
Jennifer Torkin was a part of Sunday's operation, carrying beagles out from inside of the facility.
There were no soft materials. There was pee and poop under them. The smell was bad. It was a very distressing place to be.
Those dogs are in great health. These dogs are not suffering. They're not injured. They're doing very well. This goes against what they've been telling us for a long time.
Right.
Okay, T-Sipper. So this happened towards the end of March, and I'm covering this now because I was watching the news this morning, and they were talking about protests potentially happening in Blue Mound here in Dane County. And there was the police chief speaking about the parking and how they're controlling traffic on the streets to make sure that everything is peaceful. But let's back it up. So with that peaceful protest, what I consider it peaceful, absolutely. You're rescuing dogs from inhumane conditions. The smell, not being properly taken care of, probably not being groomed, being locked up in kennels, not being supervised appropriately like you're supposed to. So this rescue mission, is absolutely great for animal activists, but most importantly for humanity. You know, thanks for standing up for the animals. You know what I mean? And this horror facility is just ridiculous, and it's quite disgusting, and the lack of empathy. We saw like someone who was a representative basically on the clip that I just played from WK Now. But this is just ridiculous. So it gets even worse. So in regards to these conditions, these protesters from a month ago are being painted as shameful, or as, you know, as people who are non-peaceful and not heroes. I just want to make sure it's very clear that these people are absolute heroes. You know what I mean? I feel like when it comes to inhumane treatment of animals, I personally don't understand what that's like. I have 5 pets. I couldn't imagine neglecting an animal or a pet. And I think these courageous people, it just speaks volumes to that people have good hearts still. And when in regard to taking care of animals, if you can't run a proper facility with great staff without ignoring the pets or making sure that the animals are getting the best quality of life, then you shouldn't be doing anything with them. You know, don't give the dogs back. Don't hand them over to those abusers. I know that some of the protesters have been taking care of the beagles over the past month or so, which is great. I'm sure there's a lot of lawsuits going on, but yeah, good on those people for doing that. And I think we need more people that are willing to stand up for what's right. And shame on that Ridgetown or Ridgeland or whatever the place is called. Shame on that farm in Blue Mound. That's ridiculous. You know, way to make Wisconsin look like shit just for doing that. But, you know, the activists did their part. Okay, so let's get into the political tea, since we haven't spent a little bit on that on this episode. And I bring you the political tea fresh every single week. And CNN has now confirmed that Iran's foreign minister announced that the Strait of Hormuz is open for the remainder of the ceasefire. And that Trump publicly acknowledged this, posting thank you on his Truth Social. Take a listen to this.
The Iranian foreign minister on X says that the Strait of Hormuz is open for all commercial vessels. We're just learning this right now. Let me read where we are getting this from X. The foreign minister saying, in line with the ceasefire in Lebanon, the passage for all commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz is declared completely open for the remaining period of the ceasefire on coordinated routes as already announced by ports and maritime organizations of the Islamic Republic of Iran. But this is a huge announcement coming from the Iranian foreign minister about what has become a central part of the negotiation, getting the Strait of Hormuz open and safely. And so we're going to bring you much more as we get this in, literally coming in as we're talking about. As we are getting this, we also have a new report that claims the United States is also considering a $20 billion deal that would help to end the conflict. This is a report from Axios, co-written also by CNN political and global affairs analyst Barack Ravid. Let me read a quote from this reporting now coming in. The U.S. and Iran are negotiating over a 3-page plan to end the war, with one element under discussion being that the U.S. would release $20 billion in frozen Iranian funds in return for Iran giving up its stockpile of enriched uranium. This according to 2 U.S. officials and 2 additional sources briefed on the talks.
So, T-Sippers, we could spend time going over the importance of not going into war, but, you know, at least there's some solution here and there's some resolve. I'm not even going to put it all the way on the president. I think he has no idea what he's doing, and I think people are coming to terms with what's happening with the oil prices and that kind of thing. So let's talk a little bit about what this means, right? If the Strait of Hormuz has immediate and global economic and geopolitical effects, it's because it's one of the most critical shipping checkpoints on Earth. Now, right now, about 20% of the world's crude oil normally passes through the Strait of Hormuz. So when it reopens, as they just announced, the oil can move again, easing supply shortages and stabilizing markets. Now, most importantly, oil prices plunged 10% after Iran announced this today, which is quite significant because the U.S. crude futures dropped actually nearly $10 per barrel, which is absolutely insane with just making that decision and what it does for prices. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what will happen when the Strait of Hormuz is open, or what will the intention be. So we will see lower fuel prices, obviously with gas. We will see a reduced inflationary pressure in regards to just kind of what that looks like. And then also some calm financial markets. So markets railed immediately after the announcement, with analysts calling it welcome news. And even though there's some shipping risk that remain, at least we could start getting like most of the commercial shipping to resume, obviously with conditions. So we know that Iran declared the strait as completely open, and that their coordinated route near the Iranian coast is basically going to continue with the opening of the strait for the duration of the ceasefire. Now, Iran says this is to avoid sea mines and to ensure safety, but some ship owners remain hesitant due to the insurance and security risks, and we can talk a little bit about what those risks are. One of those risks being that the Lebanese government has little control over Hezbollah, which gave an open-ended statement on the ceasefire after the announcement, but it just comes to show that there are a lot of power dynamics here at play, and there shouldn't be, because if this is where we're getting most of our oil, I believe that they need to be as careful as they should, especially if prices are being impacted. But Trump went on his Truth Social doing what he does, making comments like "Make Lebanon great again," and the U.S. will separately work with Lebanon and have a deal with the Hezbollah situation in an appropriate manner, is what he's saying. And Netanyahu said something on Thursday as well. And Politico is mentioning that basically that Israeli military will remain in Lebanon in a reinforced security buffer zone. And he pretty much is demanding that there's this disarmament of the group in general, or just basically conflict in regards to this happening. And this Friday, though, Israeli leaders reiterated that at the request of President Trump, with whom has changed the Middle East, if, in their opinion, and they're saying that he has tremendous accomplishments or whatever, but they are basically saying that they have agreed to a temporary ceasefire in Lebanon. Now, we know what has happened in the past couple of weeks, and it's been very, very word of mouth in regards to the ceasefire. We know that ceasefire has been something that's been on the mouth of Netanyahu and the president when it hasn't actually been happening. So, whatever. But hopefully this will be good news for those who are seeing their prices up. And most importantly, in regards to foreign affairs and just kind of how things are being handled overseas, because we don't need to be in a fucking war. And I'm glad the strait is open, and I don't think the credit should be given to the president, nor should it be given to Netanyahu. Okay, so switching gears again, and I want to talk a little bit about GLPs. So, obviously, if you are not aware, or if you live under a rock or whatever, GLP-1 is important because it's a hormone that helps regulate appetite, blood sugar, digestion, and fullness. And it was initially created to help those who struggle with obesity, but most importantly, health conditions such as high blood pressure, diabetes, heart conditions, anything of the sort. And the GLPs mimic the hormone to produce clinically significant weight loss and metabolic benefits. And recently, Wegovy just announced that they created a pill, which basically is going to replace a lot of injections for a lot of people. And, you know, this is great because GLPs do help with weight loss, and they do assist with people's overall health and living longer. And I think it's super important for this drug to be available. But most importantly, I think part of the conversation that we're forgetting to have around this is the fact that GLPs are not readily available for everyone who needs access to it. And we know this to be the case because a lot of disenfranchised communities have to pay a certain amount of copays, or sometimes regular benefits at people's jobs don't include such benefits in their insurances to cover GLPs. So with it being a powerful metabolic regulator, this is concerning in regards to access to the weight loss drug, or access to the drug that helps with this. But let's talk a little bit more about what's happening. So with the new GLP pills, like the oral one for Wegovy and Fandeu, it's pretty much a big deal because Wegovy tablets were FDA approved in December of 2025. And in regards to other approvals, we see that other drugs are being approved as well. And we see another drug that was recently approved in 2026, and that was the Foundeo, or the, I can't really say this, but I'll try, the Orforglipron, if you will. So having oral options matters because many people prefer pills over injections, and a lot of people are fearful of being on a drug, of injecting something into their body when they're used to taking pills in the first place. So why is GLP considered so important overall? So across multiple studies and clinical trials, GLP-1s basically have shown in quite a significant amount that often 10 to 20% or more, depending on the dose, constitutes weight loss, right? And we know that people typically lose a decent percentage, about 15% of their body weight, if they're on the drug for a long time. And obviously other factors come into play, your age, your ethnicity, your gender, and that kind of thing. But it basically, studies have shown clinically that it has improved blood sugar levels in many patients, but also blood pressure and lipid profiles, and reducing risk of major cardiovascular events that typically a lot of people that are obese or diabetic experience. So with that being said, I think it's super important for us to make sure that we are aware of what the drugs do, and to not judge people who are on drugs like this, especially GLPs. Now when I was around 275 pounds or so, I had lost weight already. I think I was around 350 pounds or so, and I was on a GLP initially, and it did help with some weight loss, but I was prescribed because it was helping with my diabetes and my sugar levels and my A1C. And at one point, I believe my A1C was around 15, and that my blood sugar was in the high 200s and the low 300s. So we had to get something in my system, if you will, to help regulate some of that, so I won't be at an early grave, right? So GLPs do help with that. And my thing is, I had access to it because of my insurance, but a lot of people don't have access to these kind of things. And I think it's super important as a country for more political officials and for people around the country, especially officials, political officials in every state, to start having conversations about access to Wegovy, Zepbound, Trulicity, Ozempic, all these drugs and all these appetite hormone regulators, because it helps a lot of people. And we're trying to get people to live longer. So hopefully this was some good information for you all. But, you know, I wanted to put that out there because I think there needs to be more conversations about more access to healthy options and drugs that help people live and basically correct some of these conditions that are beyond a lot of people's control. All right, T-Sippers, just to wrap the episode up tonight. Recently, Kamala Harris, who recently ran for president and who was also served as vice president under Joseph R. Biden, announced that she might run for president. And then another person that announced that he might run for president is Pete Buttigieg. And we all know that there's been a lot of scuffle about Gavin Newsom, but he doesn't have a lot of popularity within the Democratic Party, or at least among a lot of socialist and liberal and progressive voters who see Gavin Newsom as someone who kind of plays the fence in this moderate approach to leadership. Take a listen to this.
Listen, I might. I'm thinking about it.
Are you gonna run again in 28?
So, okay,
I tried to be subtle, but I just figured I'd go right in.
Well, that's as subtle as Reverend Al Sharpton could ever be. We love you for many things, but not being subtle. Listen, I might. I'm thinking about it. But let me say this. I am thinking about it. But let me also say this. Look, I served for 4 years being a heartbeat away from the presidency of the United States. I spent countless hours in my West Wing office, footsteps away from the Oval Office. I spent countless hours in the Oval Office in the Situation Room. I know what the job is, and I know what it requires, and to understand that the people they don't want process, they want progress.
That is correct. Kamala Harris is right on the money. We do want progress. And we also want our politicians to basically speak to the needs of the American people. And granted, yes, I was a huge Harris fan, even when she first ran for president in 2020. And in 2020, when when Biden was first elected. And then when she ran for president the first time in 2016. 2016 was it? I don't remember. I know she's been running for president for quite some time, and then she got handpicked by Biden after the 2020 election. But here, let's be clear. Kamala Harris told us about everything that was going to happen that is happening right now. And a lot of young voters, in my opinion, either didn't vote, or there was some kind of election fraud going on, or a lot of people just weren't interested. There was a lot of culture wars happening in the 2024 election that Harris obviously wanted to speak more to, but she was also vice president at the same time, trying to save us from this turmoil of Joe Biden not being fit for president because of his age and her only having 100 days. If you haven't read her book, you should. And I think it's about time. I think we should not put our gloves on the counter or throw away any chance that we have to have her as a leader of the free world right now. I trust her more than I do the current president, and I always will. I believe that she can revamp her message to make it resonate with more people who want peace worldwide. But most importantly, those in America who are struggling paycheck to paycheck, who have seen prices go up, who have preached about America first, and we know that that's not the priority of the president right now, given all the foreign affairs and the Epstein files, and a lot of people in power are just getting away with egregious crimes and acting like Americans are stupid. I believe that Harris will go in and she will investigate, but most importantly, she will hold all of these corrupt people basically give them some accountability for their actions. And she will hold them all in contempt, and she will hold them all in all their feet to the fire for all the egregious crimes and the bullshit that they've been putting us through. And y'all can have a different opinion all you want, but my opinion is if Harris were to run for president again, and if it was between her and J.D. Vance or her and Marco Rubio, who are y'all voting for? I'm voting for Harris. We are done with this MAGA shit. We're only 2 years through this idiot, and I believe that there's a lot of messages that need to come out from the Democratic Party in order to really, really get people excited about the 2028 election. But let's see how midterms go. I'm excited to see Pete Buttigieg's name floating out there again, in addition to Harris. But we just have to stay the course and make sure you all go to the polls in November and get these awful Trump-supporting people out of power. They are terrible for the American public. They turn a blind eye. They gaslight the American people like we don't know affordability is super important and what the president ran on, and also ran on no wars and prioritizing Americans and making sure that our paychecks are coming in steadily and the jobs are available. And we all know that that's not the case. So support who you want, but at the end of the day, if Harris were to run for president, she definitely has my vote. Okay. Thank you all so much for listening to another episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. This is your host, Mark Long. I bring you the tea every single week, and hopefully we get to dive in a little bit more as the summer, or as spring continues, but as summer approaches, I want people to start thinking about, who are you considering for a strong Democratic leader that could represent the party, right? Who are you considering? That's something that I would want to learn from you. Bye. Have a good day.